Hey folks, this is Kalani. The War Within beta is now live, and with it comes a whole bunch of changes for the expansion as a whole. There are some massive class changes and overhauls, with promises of even more coming next week for certain classes that have been left out so far, some updates to how different roles can use or benefit from certain pieces of gear, upgrading your gear may be quite a bit harder in the new expansion, and then there are also some other changes that might pique your interest. There's a lot to go through, so let's break it all down. Now before we jump in, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss another video. Let's start with the massive class changes in this very first beta build, because that will shape how your class evolves throughout the beta phase. To start with, we're going to get 40 talent loadouts to play around with in the default UI, up from 10, so you'll have access to far more talent setups without having to rely on add-ons. A lot of crowd control effects have been updated with new visual effects, and any slows greater than 50% have a special slow visual as well, so it should be easier to tell what crowd control you're currently being affected by in any kind of content. And then all talents that increase melee range have been removed. The dev team don't like that some melee have further basic range when compared to others, so they're just stripping it all out. Now for the Death Knights, they will see significant changes to their class talent tree, a lot of new talents are shifting around, and a lot of talents are also being removed to make room, and then down at the end there you can see which talents were taken out to make room for all of this crazy new stuff. For Blood Death Knight specifically, there are 2 new talents to check out. Some abilities are now baseline and learned while leveling. Quite a few talents have been changed or adjusted, including Blood Drinker, Consumption, Bone Storm, and Reinforced Bones, and a lot of talents only have 1 point cost, down from 2, so you're going to have more options elsewhere in the tree. Frost has quite a few new talents as well. Some of them seem to be quite interesting, so be sure you read through them carefully. Frost Sight has been redesigned with a 30-second cooldown, which you can reduce. Rhyme will be baseline. Breath of Syndragosa was buffed by 25%. Chill Streak can now bounce off of the Death Knight. Several talents were buffed and changed to 1-pointers, and some talents have been removed. Unholy will see the same kind of updates, lots of new talents to tinker about with, some abilities made baseline. Sudden Doom now also causes abilities to crit, and the way it procs has been changed. Sudden Doom now also only reduces runic power costs of abilities by 10 instead of making them free, and it will also burst a Festering Wound, so a lot of changes to Sudden Doom and how it interacts with your rotation. Army of the Dead was reduced down to a 3-minute cooldown, which is a massive change. Apocalypse, Dark Transformation, and Vile Contagion were all reduced down to 45-second cooldowns. Festamite can now overlap like Iron Fur. Ebon Fever can now also apply other diseases with Super Strain, and quite a few talents have been removed. Druids have a whole bunch of new talents in this build as well. Quite a few talents have been removed or added to baseline spells or kits, like Swift Mend, Improved Swipe, and Moonkin Form. A lot of talents are now 1-pointers, a few talents were removed, and some were nerfed to be less effective. Balanced Druids have a lot of new talents as well. Umbral Embrace, Astral Smolder, Astral Communion, and Nature's Grace were all redesigned. They also have a 6% damage buff to all of their abilities. Wrath, Starfire, and Shooting Stars damage were increased by 15%, Wild Mushroom damage was increased by 25%, and then pretty much every Astral Power generator was nerfed or reduced. Celestial Alignment and Incarnation both had their duration reduced, and Balanced Druid Mastery was nerfed by 17%. Orbital Strike damage is up 25%, Denizen of the Dream was buffed up 50%, there are some other talent changes thrown in there, and a few talents were removed, so a bit of a roller coaster for the Balanced Druids so far. Feral Druid has a couple of new talents to look at, but most of them have been redesigned, including their Mastery, which now increases damage of Cap Form Bleed and other periodic effects. They also got an 8% damage buff to all abilities, and another 10% buff to direct damage from Shred, Rake, Swipe, and Thrash. Berserk duration was reduced, several talents have been adjusted, some talents have been removed, and then there's kind of a balancing thing down at the bottom with damage changes. I guess the dev team forgot to remove a 20% damage aura, so that's getting removed at the bottom, with quite a few other adjustments to other abilities and their damage profile. And then for the resto druids, you'll see quite a few new talents. Tranquility initial healing is being increased by 400%, but will be decreased beyond 5 targets, and its heal over time effect will no longer be increased outside of raids. Rejuvenation healing is up 30%, Grove Guardian was nerfed by 15%, Wild Synthesis, Wild Growth was also nerfed by 15%, and there are some other talent changes and adjustments, and then you can see the 3 talents were removed down at the bottom. Moving on to the Evokers, the class tree has moved around a bit. How an Evoker levels has totally changed. They now start at level 10 and unlock talents immediately after learning a specialization. When you learn spells has been updated to reflect that new leveling progression. A few talents are being squished together into choice nodes. A few other talents have been adjusted. A pressing roar will have a wider cone, and landslide will only root for 15 seconds. For augmentation, they will see a few new talents. Prescience is being updated to prefer DPS players who have major cooldowns active, so Prescience is getting a bit smarter if you don't want to micromanage your targets. Motes of Possibility were changed to grant a random augmentation evoker buff. Overlord is now a 1-point talent, and some talents have been removed or shifted around in the talent tree. For Devastation, there's a new talent that increases your red damage spells when your target is affected by Fire Breath. Several talents have been redesigned or adjusted. Fire Breath and Pyre Threat have both been reduced significantly, and a few talents have been adjusted or removed. And then for Preservation, there are a couple of new talents. A few talents have been buffed. Dream Flight Healing was increased by 100% outside of raids. Some mana costs were reduced. There were some changes to how Stasis interacts with other talents, abilities and effects, and a few talents were made 1-pointers down from 2-pointers. The Mages are up next. They're going to see a shift around in the class talent tree, a handful of new talents, an update to Time Anomaly, Supernova made its way into the class tree, Mass Slow was removed, and Mass Polymorph was reduced down to 15 seconds. For Arcane specifically, there are a lot of new talents coming in that change up how you can play and just give you more options in general. A lot of key talents and effects have also been redesigned, including Arcane Missiles, Nether Precision, Arcane Familiar, Illuminated Thoughts, Concentration, and Spark of the Magi. Various talents and effects have been made baseline. You can no longer proc clear casting while out of combat. Evocation will provide 1 stack of clear casting. Arcane Surge will now always grant clear casting as well. Arcane Surge will have a higher chance to grant clear casting, and a lot of talents have been removed. Fire will see quite a lot of new talent coming in the next expansion as well. You'll have plenty of choices for how you want to deal damage. A lot of talents have also been redesigned, so Fire as a whole could end up playing quite different from what you're used to. A lot of talents or effects have also been made baseline. Living Bomb damage was doubled. Several other talents have seen adjustments. Quite a few talents are now 1-pointers, and a lot of talents have been removed to make room for those shiny new ones. And then Frost only has a few changes. 1 new talent, Fractured Frost, has been redesigned, Ice Barrier was buffed slightly, and Hailstones is a 1-point talent now. Now the monks have an incredible list of changes to go through, so bear with me here. There are a lot of new talents coming for the class tree for monks, probably the most new talents out of any class tree updated in this build especially. Alongside all of those new talents, a lot of key options are also being redesigned, so monks are going to be quite a bit different when all of these changes actually go through. There's a long list of talents that were reduced down to 1-pointers, giving you more talents to spend elsewhere in the tree, and a lot of talents have been removed to make room for these new ones. So read through the new ones carefully and see which talents were kicked out of the tree to make room. For Brewmaster, there are even more new talents coming through to take a look at. Some of them sound quite interesting as well. A few other talents and effects have been updated or adjusted. Improved Celestial Brew and Purifying Brew will now both be baseline, and quite a few talents have been removed. For Mistweaver, there are a lot of new talents as you might expect. A lot of other talents have been redesigned. Gust of Mist Healing was increased by 20%. Jade Bond now increases the healing of Yulon's Soothing Breath by 300%, up from 40%. Invigorating Mists was buffed up by 8%. Vivify Healing is up 9%, and its mana cost was reduced. Revival is actually going to see an interesting nerf here. Its Dispel mechanic is being capped at 3 magical debuffs per target, instead of all magical debuffs, so you won't be able to cleanse absolutely everything with a single button anymore. Revival healing was also increased by 400%, but will be reduced beyond 5 targets, and quite a few talents have been removed. And then for Windwalker, we have another super long list of new talents. So not only will monks see a lot of changes to their class tree, but if you're playing a Windwalker monk, you're going to double that for your spec tree as well. There are so many new talents coming through here, and we could see many more before the War Within actually launches. A lot of key effects or talents are also being redesigned. Mastery is going to be 20% more effective. There are some changes to which abilities will trigger your mastery. There are a lot of adjustments to talents and effects, various minor buffs and nerfs. A A lot of cooldowns are being shifted slightly. Fury of Zuen will now provide haste, mastery, and crit instead of just haste, and will invoke Zuen for a bit longer, and then yet another long list of talents being reduced down to 1 point, or talents being removed from the tree. Paladins are up next, and they're going to see a bit of a shift in their class talent tree. Greater Judgment can now stack and overlap, and a few other talents were changed or removed. For Holy, they have a new talent in Bestow Light. Light of the Martyr has been redesigned to be a passive effect while you are above 80% health. Blessing of Summer has been redesigned as well. Beacon of Light healing transfer was nerfed down to 15%, Barrier Faith was nerfed down to 20%, but Word of Glory, Light of Dawn, Holy Shock, and Tears Deliverance were all buffed by quite a bit. A few other talents have been buffed or nerfed slightly, and Light's Hammer has been removed. For Protection Paladin, Bastion of Light has been redesigned to help you generate more holy power. Sanctuary was redesigned to let you keep your consecration buff after leaving its area of effect. Crusader's Resolve has been redesigned to provide extra damage mitigation when using Avenger's Shield. Strength in Adversary was buffed up to 5% from 2%, and then Light of the Titans and Bulwark of Order are now 1 point talents. Retribution has a bit of a longer list. They're going to see quite a few new talents. A lot of their talents are getting redesigned, including Righteous Cause, Art of War, Divine Hammer, Final Reckoning, Vengeful Wrath, Vanguard of Justice, and Templar Strikes. So a lot of key talents will be changing up here, in some cases quite significantly. Templar Strikes damage was buffed up by 25% and its cooldown was increased. Quite a lot of other talents are getting redesigned and buffed. Some talents and effects are being made baseline. Mastery is changed slightly to provide some extra damage. Wake of Ashes will now fire towards your camera's location, not to where your character is facing, which might take a little bit of getting used to, and a lot of other talents have been buffed or slightly nerfed. Then we come to the priests, who don't have too many changes so far. Their class tree has been shifted around a bit, but that's kind of it for the general class changes. For discipline specifically, Rapture was doubled up to an 80% bonus to Power Word Shield, but it's only going to be for your next 3 casts, so that kind of changes how you might want to use that spell moving forward. Luminous Barrier absorb amount was increased by 400%, but as with everything else, it will be decreased beyond 5 targets. The only change we have for Holy Priest so far is that same raid healing change that every other healer is going to get, so Divine Hymn healing was increased by 400% but will heal for less beyond 5 targets. Shadow will have a new choice node alongside Shadow Crash, and there's going to be a tooltip update for Shadow Crash too, so nothing too exciting for Shadow Priests just yet. Rogues are up next, and they'll see a lot of talents move around in the class tree, some new talents to spice things up. Acrobatic Strikes has been redesigned, some talents have been moved into the spec trees, a few talents have been adjusted, and then Night Stalker has been removed. For Assassination, they'll see 2 new talents, a few talents are getting redesigned. Kingsbane damage bonus per poison is now capped at 1000% from 50 stacks, Kingsbane damage over time was buffed by 6%, and then a few talents have been removed. For Outlaw, their mastery was buffed by 24%, Ace Up Your Sleeve was nerfed slightly, Adrenaline Rush has been updated, a few talents have been nerfed, Blade Flurry will now have an 8-yard radius to offset the melee range changes, and Sepsis has been removed. And then for the sub-rogues, Premeditation has been redesigned to make your next generator grant full combo points, Shadow Focus now reduces costs by 5%, and Shadow Dance was moved to the sub-talent tree, so only sub-rogues will get to Shadow Dance moving forward. Shamans only have the one change for raid healing, so Healing Tide Totem was increased by 400% but will heal for less beyond 5 targets. Hopefully Shamans will see some love in the coming weeks. Warlocks have the same class tree treatment as most other classes, lots of talents moving around, the general pathing on the tree is being updated, quite a few new talents to look at, some important talents are being redesigned, point costs are being reduced, and quite a few new talents are being removed. For Affliction, you'll see a lot of new talents, which is kind of par the course at this point, but pretty much all Warlock specs have a lot of new talents coming their way. A lot of talents have also been redesigned, while Malefic Rapture will be made baseline and now deal Shadow Flame damage. Haunt also saw a 230% damage increase, and then we have a long list of talents being removed down at the end. Some talents are being pushed down further in the tree, there are some new talents at the end of the list, and even more talents are being reduced down to 1 point. For Demonology, you'll see a lot of new talents making their way into the talent tree, giving you more options for where you want your damage to come from. Quite a few key talents have been redesigned, including Doom, so be sure you check those out. The cooldown of various abilities was reduced, a lot of talents were reduced down to 1 point, and then there's a long list of talents that are being removed to make space in the Demonology tree. And then for destruction, a lot of new talents making their way in here. Hopefully this creates some more choice as you work through the talent tree. A lot of talents have also been redesigned. Chaos Bolt will now be baseline, Summon Infernal cooldown was reduced, and we have a long list of talents that will be 1 pointers moving forward, and a lot of talents have also been removed. And then last but by no means least, we come to the warriors. The class tree will shift around quite a bit. Berserker Rage will now be learned baseline. There are a lot of changes to Thunderclap talent. A lot of talents that generate or interact with rage have been changed. Slam damage was increased by 130%, but the arm's slam damage bonus was reduced to 50%, Blade Storm damage was increased by 70%, Ravager damage was reduced by 10%, and some talents have been removed. For arms specifically, there's a new talent in Finishing Blows, Barbaric Training, and Storm of Swords have been redesigned. There are a lot of changes to rage costs, mostly reducing them, but rage generation has also been reduced. Cleave damage was buffed, its cooldown was reduced, and it can now trigger a bunch of effects that it couldn't previously. There are quite a lot of changes to Overpower and various talents that interact with it. A lot of abilities will no longer generate rage, Dreadnought damage was reduced by 58%, and a couple of talents have been removed. For Fury, there's a new talent in Powerful Enrage, Defensive Stance is learned by default, a lot of talents have changed or have been adjusted, Bloodthirst damage is up 43%, Blaze Storm will now generate 10 rage per damage event, and a lot of talents have been removed or replaced. And then for protection, they have a new talent in Fight Through the Flames, Battle Scarred Veteran has been updated, Whirlwind rage cost and damage were reduced, Ren's rage cost was reduced, Defensive Stance no longer reduces damage dealt by Prot Warriors, and Improved Heroic Throw has been removed. With so many sweeping changes here, I would encourage you to check out the full list for yourself, and if you have access to the beta, maybe hop on and see how your class plays with all of this in place. That is the best way you're going to be able to provide feedback and shape your class to become the best and most fun it can be for this expansion moving forward. As the beta progresses, we are going to see many more changes, so stay tuned for those updates. Now you may have noticed that some classes were basically left out of this update, and if you've been keeping up with the alpha changes so far, you probably know that hunters haven't really had any changes whatsoever in the War Within so far. The good news is that the dev team posted that we should see some hunter changes come through with the next build, which is planned for next week. Usually we will see a new build deployed every week. I guess it depends on how much they have to push in a new testing environment, but we should get a build next week, and it should include some hunter changes. We don't have any idea of the scope of those changes, but the post does say that it includes class talent tree changes as well as spec tree updates for all 3 hunter specs. So every aspect of hunter should get at least some new info next week, which is very exciting because again, nothing has really changed so far in the War Within, so keep your eyes peeled for another class changes update next week. Now, a curious update in this first build is a change in philosophy for how to handle healers and tanks using DPS trinkets in the War Within expansion. According to a recent blue post, DPS trinkets will provide about 33% less damage while they are equipped by a healer or a tank, so some trinkets will just deal more damage if you are a damage dealer specialization. The general idea here seems to be to bring the DPS value of DPS trinkets down to the same level of DPS value that tank or healer trinkets might offer, so instead of choosing between a trinket that provides a damage and tanking benefit versus one that only provides more damage, the damage portion of both of those trinkets should be about equal, so that tanks should always want the option that also then benefits their defensive or self-healing capabilities. I get the idea, and this change would definitely make tanks lean more towards actual tanking trinkets, but that doesn't mean this isn't a nerf to their damage potential. You're just taking the damage potential off the table by nerfing the trinkets and calling them DPS only. I feel like part of the problem here is that DPS players have run into quite a few scenarios where everyone wants the best DPS trinkets. So while healers usually only have to worry about other healers needing healer trinkets, and tanks only worrying about tanks needing tank trinkets, DPS kinda have to share that trinket loot pool with every other spec and role, especially for a trinket that is top dog. Most tanks and healers also get to the point where they don't really need the help from those trinkets in a tanking or healing environment, so then equipping a DPS trinket and letting that do some extra work on the damage front makes a lot of sense, because they don't really benefit from the tankiness or the healing increases from role appropriate trinkets. This change would keep those trinkets competitive no matter what, and keep each role kinda separate in terms of trinket loot anyway. This change isn't just limited to trinkets though, it also includes items with any additional effects that that provide damage, so pretty much any special weapon, or the special rings that we saw within Dragonflight, or really anything that provides you with a damage boost. So either way, tanks and healers will probably have fewer good trinket and weapon options due to this change, so I hope the dev team makes some sweet trinkets for these roles with the damage trinket nerfs in play. Do you think that keeping tanks in the tank lane and healers in the healer lane is a good thing, or should you be free to pick and choose which kinds of trinkets you want to play with to augment your playstyle without worrying about random nerfs being thrown in just because you're not a DPS? Let me know how you feel about these changes in the comments section below. We also have some updates for how seasonal content is going to be handled for the start of the expansion, which is even more important this time around due to the pre-purchase early access. Wowhead has data mined a restriction on heroic dungeons. Heroic dungeon queues will not be available until Season 1 of the War Within begins. Now the odd part here is that it only mentions they won't be available in the dungeon finder, so you won't be able to queue for them, but it doesn't outright say that heroic dungeons will be disabled like Mythic 0 dungeons are until the start of a season usually. This means you may be able to walk or fly to the dungeon entrance and enter on heroic mode, just like you would have to do for a Mythic 0 difficulty dungeon. If it's only the queue that's not available, you should still be able to hop into heroic dungeons, get yourself that higher item level loot and better rewards, and start working on your character's progression. This is actually a very popular strategy at the start of an expansion, because by running to the dungeon, you also skirt around any item level requirements for joining the dungeon finder queue, so you can jump in below the minimum item level needed to queue up and still obtain heroic dungeon rewards. The main caveat here is that you would have to make your own group, because the group finder isn't going to do the work for you, so you'll have to build your own group from guildies, friends, or using the LFG tool and do a bit of legwork to get to the dungeon. I will be very interested to see if this change remains in place, or if they either enable heroic dungeon queues or just totally disable heroic dungeons. It seems odd to restrict them for just queue and pug groups, so this will be something to keep an eye on for sure. Another update that we have for dungeons and seasonal content is a glimpse at what the new crest upgrade materials might be called in the War Within, and they might also be harder to acquire. It looks like we'll be collecting Harbinger crests for Season 1 at least, and the names are being changed from Whelpling, Drake, Worm and Aspect to Weathered, Carved, Runed and Gilded. So those are the new names for the crests we'll be chasing after to upgrade all of our gear, and we can also see where these crests should come from. The Weathered crests are heroic difficulty dungeons, LFR raid and outdoor activities, so pretty much the same as right now. The Carved crests are Mythic 0 dungeons, normal raids and some outdoor activities, so again pretty similar, but Runed crests will drop from heroic raids as well as +4 keys or above instead of +2 keys. They should also drop until +8 keys, which means you'll have to push a bit further in your Mythic plus Keystone adventures to get your hands on those last crests, the Gilded crests. They're only going to drop from +9 keys or above, so you won't be able to farm +6 keys for the highest tiers of crests, and you won't even be able to get them if you can't push up to those +9 keys. So that's an interesting change. It has actually been a common complaint that getting the highest tiers of crests from Mythic Plus dungeons is a lot easier when compared to getting them from raids in Dragonflight. Completing a +6 key is nowhere near as challenging as killing bosses on Mythic in the raid, so maybe the plan here is to try and bring those sources more in line with each other, but even then a +9 key is still significantly easier than Mythic raid bosses, so I'll be interested to see how this changes as we move forward. The Gilded crests will still drop from Mythic raids as well. Now bear in mind, with this being the very first alpha build, this could very well change by the time the expansion goes live, or we could see further changes to how the Mythic Plus system scales and progresses, or the entire upgrade system could see a bit of an overhaul. It's hard to get a full picture when the beta just started, so it is all still subject to change, but getting your crests from Mythic Plus could be more difficult in the War Within when compared to Dragonflight. And then the last little update we have is that the new allied race, the Earthen, will no longer be able to be Death Knights. That class option was removed a few builds ago, but with the beta starting up, we also have a blue post confirming the change, and I guess lore-wise, it kinda makes sense. The Earthen can't really go back to die during Wrath and get resurrected as a Death Knight, and do they really die in the same way other mortals do? I know that none of that really matters, because we have a whole bunch of other class race combos that also don't make sense, but it is still interesting interesting to see the dev team remove a class option from a new race. Personally, I think more options are better, so it's a bit disappointing for me, but if it's that easy to turn off a class option, it should be just as easy to turn it back on, right? So maybe they'll turn it back on later on down the road and we will get to play as Earthern Death Knights, but for now, Death Knights are sadly off the table. But that's all of the big changes in the first beta build of the War Within expansion, so that's it for this video. Remember that if you pre-ordered the Epic Edition, you can hop straight into the beta right now, so if there's something you want to test specifically, that is the best way to jump in and see what's happening. That is, if you can stay connected for longer than 5 minutes anyway. What do you think of the huge class changes from what you've seen so far, and how do you feel about crests being harder to obtain in the War Within? Leave all your thoughts in the comment section below. A big thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon and to all of our members here on YouTube. You can see the names floating by on screen. If you're interested in supporting the channel, you can find links in the description or click the join button just below the video. If you enjoyed the video or found it useful in any way, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you're always kept up to date. Thanks for watching, folks. Good luck and have fun, and as always, I will see you next time.